A Star Trek episode that uses time travel shenanigans to make the franchise's fictional history more in line with our actual history? Well, I certainly hope they never feel the need to do that again. This is a review of the classic Star Trek Voyager episode, Future's End. If you have not seen this episode, and you don't want to know what happens in it, be warned, spoilers beyond this point. So, here we are once again in Season 3 of Star Trek Voyager, the season that also includes the Sulu episode and the Q Civil War episode, and that introduces the Borg into the series. Year 3 was definitely the please watch this show, it has the things you like season, wasn't it? And speaking of getting people to watch the show, Future's End, Voyager's epic 2-part time travel saga, originally aired in November, which was a sweeps month. For those of you too young to remember or who just didn't give a damn at the time, sweeps was when Nielsen, the company that measures TV ratings, would survey the audiences of local TV stations around the United States to determine how many people were watching. This happened 4 times a year for a month at a time, in November, February, May, and July. Those were sweeps months, and they were important because TV stations would use the ratings recorded during sweeps to set their advertising rates for the following quarter of the year. The higher the ratings, the more they could charge sponsors to run commercials. Consequently, to keep the affiliates who aired their shows happy, TV networks would regularly schedule things for sweeps months designed to boost the ratings. Concerts, celebrity interviews, and special episodes of popular series. Sweeps aren't really a thing anymore. They measure ratings differently now, but they were totally still a thing in 1996, which is why the producers of Star Trek Voyager decided to slot their time travel 2-parter in for the 2nd and 3rd week of November. Because if characters from a Star Trek show cosplaying as characters from an Aaron Spelling show wasn't a ratings draw in 1996, I don't know what was. Oh yeah, I remember Must See TV. I only remember the titles of 3 of the approximately 800 shows that were a part of it, but I remember Must See TV. I guess I should talk about Future's End at some point, huh? Okay then. It's Earth 1967 and a dirty hippie is camped in the mountains when he sees a spaceship crash nearby. Cut to credits, cut to our usual gang on their usual ship in their usual time and place. Janeway is talking to Tuvok about how she's gonna start playing tennis again, when all of a sudden, Voyager is attacked by a time ship, piloted by this guy, Captain Braxton, who explains that he's come from the 29th century, where Voyager is responsible for a cataclysm that destroys Earth's entire solar system. Braxton's like, to prevent that from happening, I'm just gonna blow up your ship right here. Hold still. Getting blown up by a time ship doesn't work for Janeway, so she fights back, and as a result, both the time ship and Voyager get pulled into the time portal that the time ship arrived through. When they emerge on the other side, the crew is momentarily elated to see Earth on the view screen. They're home. But their excitement is short-lived. They're in the right place, but the wrong time. According to Harry's readings, the year is 1996. Tuvok detects subspace signals coming from the vicinity of Los Angeles. Janeway concludes that Braxton's time ship must have crashed in that area. Not wanting the timeline to be corrupted by the presence of future technology, Janeway organizes an away team of herself, Chakotay, Tuvok, and Paris, and they beam down to investigate. Chakotay's like, I was a recurring character on Models Inc. a few years ago. Follow me, I know what to do. They know the source of the subspace readings is nearby, but they can't pinpoint it, so they split up. Janeway and Chakotay going one way, Tuvok and Paris going another. Using her tricorder, Janeway locates the source of the subspace readings, which is Captain Braxton, who has apparently been living as a homeless person for the last 30 years. It was his time ship that the dirty hippie saw crashing in the mountains during the cold open. Braxton explains to Janeway and Chakotay that after his ship crashed in 1967, the hippie who witnessed it, Henry Starling, salvaged it and used its technology to develop computer products, making himself a billionaire in the process. But that's not all. Braxton has been thinking it over for the past 3 decades and has figured out that it won't be Voyager that's responsible for the cataclysm that destroys the solar system in the 29th century. It will be his own time ship, piloted by Starling, who will accidentally trigger a temporal explosion because he doesn't know what he's doing. So now their mission is clear. Find Henry Starling, get back the time ship before he tries to use it to travel to the future. However, meanwhile, at Griffith Observatory, hey, that looks just like Jor-El's laboratory on Krypton. And MacGyver's house. Hip young astrophysicist Rain Robinson has detected Voyager in orbit. She doesn't know it's Voyager, just that there's something up there that shouldn't be there. She calls in her finding to none other than Henry Starling, who funds her research lab and has asked to be notified if she received any signals that might indicate the presence of, let's say a spaceship from the future. Starling thanks Rain for calling in and tells her to keep her mouth shut about the finding for now, but after she hangs up, she can't resist reaching out herself, and she sends Voyager an adorable 20th century friendship greeting. Harry tells Janeway about the friendship greeting from Griffith Observatory, and Janeway orders Tuvok and Paris to go see what that's about. Voyager's transporters are conveniently not working right now, so Tuvok and Paris steal a truck and drive to Griffith, where they meet Rain. She and Paris bond immediately over their shared love of B-movies, and while Rain is distracted with that, Tuvok erases her computer's hard drive to eliminate any evidence of Voyager's presence. Rain discovers this as soon as Tuvok and Paris leave and chases after them, but there's no time to fight about it because Henry Starling found out that Rain apparently blabbed to some of her colleagues about the UFO she discovered in orbit, so Starling sent his henchman Dunbar after her with a phaser, and now Dunbar is pulling up at the observatory and he shoots his phaser and vaporizes the truck Tom Paris stole. Oh shit! I hope that truck wasn't destined to play a pivotal role in history. Paris, Tuvok, and Rain escape in Rain's van. Meanwhile, Janeway and Chakotay sneak into Starling's office at ChronoWorks, his company. We see a photo of Starling shaking hands with Richard Nixon just to drive home the point that he's a villain. After some snooping around, Janeway and Chakotay discover that Braxton's timeship is right here, in a storage bay next to Starling's office. But before they can do anything about it, Starling himself shows up, and he's like, "Aha! You've come from the future to steal back the time ship. Well, I'm not gonna let you. I've been expecting you all these years, and now that I've caught you, you'll never escape my—" Oh, you're beaming out. Harry has decided to risk detection and fly Voyager in at a low enough altitude to beam up Chakotay and Janeway using the short-range transporters, which are still working. Once they're back on the ship, Janeway orders Harry to beam up the time ship, but Starling has it protected with a force field. He's able to block the transporter beam and use it to download a bunch of information from Voyager's computer, including the Doctor's holographic program. Starling has also discovered that Voyager is not from the 29th century, as he assumed, but merely the 24th century, which he believes gives him the advantage. Part 1 ends with amateur video footage of the ship's low pass over Los Angeles making the news. That's one way to get people to watch Voyager. As Part 2 begins, Tuvok modifies a cell phone to contact Voyager and informs Captain Janeway of their situation and of the assistance they've received from Rain. They come up with a plan to capture the timeship. Rain calls Starling pretending to be in a panic and demanding he come pick her up. So, Starling goes to pick her up, accompanied by the Doctor, who Starling has fitted with a fancy 29th century mobile holographic emitter, and whose cooperation Starling has secured by modifying his program to allow him to feel pain. While that's happening, Chakotay and B'Elanna are flying in on a shuttlecraft, which will be easier to keep out of sight than Voyager itself. As they make their descent, B'Elanna asks Chakotay if he's given any thought to what he will do if they wind up stuck here in the 20th century. Chakotay's like, I can earn a living as a George Clooney impersonator at parties. I'm really worried about the rest of you. Tuvok sends B'Elanna the coordinates of Starling's position, and the shuttle zooms in and beams him up. But as he dematerializes, Starling activates another of his 29th century gadgets, which blocks the transport and damages the shuttle. Voyager is able to deactivate Starling's device and beam him aboard, but Chakotay is forced to crash land the shuttle somewhere in Arizona, where he and B'Elanna are promptly captured by these eventual Trump voters, who suspect them of working for the government because they're wearing, quote, military uniforms, which just goes to show how clueless these yokels really are, since Chakotay and B'Elanna are clearly wearing pajamas. Back on Voyager, Starling is being kept behind a force field in sickbay. Janeway's there like, give me that time ship. But Starling refuses, telling Janeway, you only have 24th century technology, but I have 29th century technology, which is why you won't be able to stop me from taking the time ship into the future to steal more future technology to bring back here to exploit and develop into commercial products, for that is my plan. That's how I created the computer revolution. Without me, there'd be no internet, no laptops, no medical alert bracelets, no baby monitors, no programmable thermostats, no lights that you can turn on and off by clapping your hands. The world would be unrecognizable. Janeway says, if you try to fly that time ship, you'll set off an explosion that will destroy the entire solar system, killing billions of people, including you. Starling says, that's a risk I'm willing to take. And there was a time when I would have found that an unrealistic response, when I would have found it implausible for a wealthy, self-proclaimed innovative pioneer to receive such a dire warning about how his reckless misuse of technology would inevitably lead to disaster and just shrug it off. But in light of recent events, yeah, I believe it. Starling's henchman Dunbar uses the time ship to beam him off of Voyager. Tuvok and the Doctor split off from Paris and Rain and head to Arizona real fast to find Chakotay and B'Elanna. Paris and Rain drive to Chrono Works and spot a truck leaving with what they assume to be the time ship in the back, so they take off after it. Federal agents surround the Doomsday Prepper bunker where Chakotay and B'Elanna are being held, and the rednecks are like, we're gonna get Ruby Ridged, boys! It's the day we've all been praying for! But before the feds can move in, the Doctor and Tuvok arrive and stun the feds with phasers. One of the white nationalists in the bunker describes Tuvok as, quote, a black man, which completely breaks my immersion, but I don't mind in this case. And then the Doctor walks in, stuns the future officers of the Arizona Republican Party State Committee, and unties Chakotay and B'Elanna, informing them that Tuvok has gone to start repairs on their crashed shuttlecraft. They get the shuttle back flying again. They head toward the truck carrying the time ship that Paris and Rain are following, only it turns out it's only a decoy, and the real time ship is still back at Chrono Works. Sterling gets in the time ship and takes off. Tom says goodbye to Rain, who is kinda sorta his girlfriend now, only not really because he's from the future, and once everyone is back aboard Voyager, they take off after Starling and the time ship. Voyager's weapons are offline, so Janeway heads to the torpedo bay to prepare a torpedo for manual launch. They catch up to Starling, and Janeway launches the torpedo, destroying the time ship just before it's able to jump to the 29th century. Janeway is a little singed from the manual torpedo launch, but seems mostly fine. She returns to the bridge just in time to see the arrival of the time ship, piloted by Captain Braxton, who doesn't remember anything about trying to destroy Voyager or getting thrown back in time to the 20th century and being a homeless person, because Voyager prevented the solar system destroying disaster that started these events in motion, so none of that ever happened. Braxton detected a 24th century starship in the 20th century and has come to return Voyager to where it belongs, which, unfortunately for Janeway and her crew, means back to the Delta Quadrant. Oh well. At least the Doctor still has that 29th century mobile emitter. He can go to other rooms now. Here's to ignoring the Temporal Prime Directive. Future's End has a larger scale and higher stakes than Past Tense, the Deep Space Nine episode I reviewed in the previous video of this series, but it also lacks that episode's sense of tension and its incisive political commentary. Chakotay and B'Elanna do get briefly captured by a violent right-wing anti-government sect, but the episode doesn't use that development to make any particular comment on people like that or American society. The message, such as it is, seems to be, look at these dumbasses, which, yeah, accurate. Despite its lack of socio-political substance, this is a pretty good episode. Especially for Voyager. It's fun, it keeps things moving, it's decently paced, and only gets bogged down in exposition once or twice. This is like the third or fourth time we've seen Star Trek characters dropped into present-day society, so the writers wisely go easy on the anachronism jokes. We've seen those already, mostly in Star Trek IV, and it's doubtful Voyager would be able to improve on anything there. So, we get Tom Paris trying to blend in by using out-of-date slang like groovy, and Tuvok ordering inappropriate breakfast foods, but that's about it. There are no gags about how they don't know how to drive, or how to use computers. They beam down, we get to giggle at their silly clothes, which are the kinds of clothes people actually wore at the time, making this the most biting bit of social commentary in the episode, and they get down to business. There are two major guest stars in the episode. Ed Begley Jr. is Henry Starling and Sarah Silverman as Rain Robinson. Silverman is a star today, but was mostly unknown to general audiences in 1996, having done stand-up comedy and one season of Saturday Night Live and not much else. She turns in a good performance here, and thankfully the writers don't go overboard trying to make Rain the embodiment of the youth of the 1990s. She comes across as smart, sufficiently observant to recognize that there's something not quite right about Paris and Tuvok, and she has enough chemistry with Paris so that their flirtation/romance doesn't feel too forced. Begley does an excellent job as Starling leaning into the impenetrable arrogance of the man. Here's a guy who is obviously smart. He didn't just find the crashed timeship, he also knew what to do with it, but has been convinced by his own success that his brilliance was more important than the 29th century technology he was fortunate enough to stumble upon. Begley makes Starling a credible threat to our heroes and a loathsome person, but not loathsome in a way that makes him unwatchable, which is key. He's awful, but not unpleasant. He's ruthless, as when he sends his henchmen out with a phaser to kill Rain, Paris, and Tuvok. He's cruel, as when he reprograms the Doctor to feel pain. And he's convinced himself that by pursuing his own selfish interests, he's also helping humanity. He's so committed to helping humanity, in fact, that destroying all of it with the timeship is a risk he's willing to take. I imagine a 25-year-old Elon Musk watching this episode back in the day and taking notes. The performances by the regulars are all strong, and a few of them even get actual characters to play this time. Chakotay comes across as a human being with a past and opinions and emotions. I wouldn't have thought it possible, but there it was on my TV. Janeway gets some memorable moments, too. I appreciate the intensity she brings to the line, "I won't sacrifice this crew based on a 10-second conversation," after Braxton appears and demands Voyager allow itself to be destroyed, and her delivery of a badass one-liner after getting nowhere with Starling in sickbay. ChronoWorks stock is about to crash. There is something undeniably, almost primally satisfying about seeing Star Trek characters fuck up a billionaire tech CEO. It just feels right. Like, when Captain Kirk blows up General Chang in Star Trek VI, or Garrick kills the last Weyoun in Deep Space Nine, I recognize that they were bastards and had it coming, but I'm also kinda sad, you know? Not the case with Henry Starling. He gets hit with that torpedo, and I'm like, ha ha, good, fuck him. The main plot is well assembled and allows the characters to get where they need to go and do what they need to do. They visit iconic locations and befriend the locals and interact with a reasonable facsimile of the real world without things feeling too contrived. for the most part. There are a few subplots that seem like they're only there to pad out the runtime or give certain characters a reason to appear, like Voyager getting spotted as a UFO, which is used for the hook at the end of Part 1, but ends up meaning nothing and going nowhere. Ditto for Neelix becoming briefly fascinated by 20th century media, particularly soap operas, and the Chakotay and B'Elanna captured by a militia scenes, which aren't bad in and of themselves, but definitely feel like a complication tossed in to stretch out the episode. On the other hand, added complications like that do help Part 2 to feel like more than just an extended resolution of Part 1, which I appreciate. And like I said, the main plot, involving the search for and attempts to recover the time ship, is nicely structured for the most part. Characters have a clear goal, which they pursue in sensible ways, and the obstacles they encounter are ones that it makes sense for them to encounter. The cute little twist at the end of having Captain Braxton show up again to rescue them this time with no memory of trying to kill them before even helps to disguise the fact that their return to their own time is basically accomplished by a deus ex machina. Some might consider it a plot hole that Henry Starling and his reverse engineering of 29th century technology is credited with kicking off the computer revolution, but then that timeline is erased by the end of the episode. Voyager prevents the 29th century solar system destroying cataclysm, which is what set in motion the chain of events that led to the time ship crashing in 1967 for Starling to find in the first place. So if Starling isn't responsible for laptops and the internet and such, where did they come from? But is that really a plot hole? I suppose it is if you want to interpret Henry Starling as the reason why contemporary technology seemingly outpaced the 23rd century technology we see in Star Trek the original series. But if you're like me and you don't care about that stuff, and you're happy to accept Star Trek TOS as a show that predicted the future from the vantage point of the 1960s, and Star Trek Voyager as a show that predicted the future from the vantage point of the 1990s, you can just assume that laptops and the internet and such came from where they actually came from. Besides, the Doctor still has his mobile emitter at the end of the episode, so at least some of that Henry Starling technology must have stuck around somehow, right? So yeah, a diverting little trifle of an episode, which is a strange thing to say about an epic time travel two-parter that was promoted as a major event in the series. Future's End happens. It's fun while it lasts, and when it's over, it might as well have never happened at all. Appropriate, given the resolution of the story. The only lasting impact it has on the series is giving the Doctor the ability to leave sickbay, a development which I was never a fan of. It diminishes his character, takes away a limitation that made him different and special, and smacks of a decision that was made for the convenience of the writers rather than the good of the character. But all that being the case, and this being Voyager we're talking about, we're still left with an episode that is well above average and a sterling example of what Voyager does best. Perfectly acceptable Star Trek. Those are my thoughts on Future's End. What do you think of this episode? Please share your thoughts with me in the comments. If you'd like to support this channel, and I sure wish you would if you can afford it, you can do so by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives, becoming a channel member by clicking the join button, or by making a one-time gift by clicking the thanks button, or via PayPal or Venmo. Links are in the description. Don't forget to join me and my best friend Jason Harding this weekend for our review of episode 5 of season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Our review will be up sometime on Saturday. And please come back next week for another retro review. I will conclude this batch of time travel shows with a review of the Star Trek Enterprise episode Carpenter Street. I'll see you next week for that. Thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.